restaurants here that are putting into practice are not really working because they're actually forcing some people outside, and then those people are standing in lines. That's becoming an enclosed space, and as you said, not a lot of face coverings. In Illinois, just about an hour away, they are required. Here in Wisconsin, they are not. I will remind you, as you know, of course, the governor had put restrictions in here in the state of Wisconsin. Those were overturned by the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, which is what has led to all this. You talk to businesses here, they'll say, sure, we're grateful for the business, but it's their employees who are worried about their health, the health of their families. Nobody really knows how this is going to play out. You talk to people, and they say they're brave. This is their way of getting out. This is their freedom from Illinois, telling us to go home. That's the situation here. There doesn't seem to be any social distancing and not a lot of care when it comes to the coronavirus case.
So the people there are just not worried about it, Cal? They're not worried about their own personal safety?
I haven't met anybody who is. I met some folks actually from Lake Geneva who lived in the area. They were staying a few miles outside of town where I work, and they said they're worried about it. They're worried about that second spike. They're worried about folks coming in from Chicago, but they'll quickly add at the same time, this is a place that relies on that business. I think people here want a little bit more funding when it comes to these programs so that they could stay closed, but again, I think people felt like the Supreme Court made the decision here in Wisconsin that it was time to open up. So you can see, here, just around. Nobody's wearing them. Nobody's, there you go, including the camera. Yeah. Katie.
Striking images. Cal Perry. Cal, thank you very much.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started.
They've already lit things on fire so far, Chris. They lit a police car on fire around 8 o'clock. That was just, still smoldering. They've lit signs on fire. This is a crowd that came to confront police. They're angry, and we can't underscore, on the cursory level, you see the violence that is happening and unfolding right in front of our cameras. They're here under the premise because a black man was killed by police. They want to hold police accountable. Their message, however, has taken a violent tone here, and we don't hear the mention of George Floyd's name at all. We just see the violence happening here in front of us.
Well, this is a bizarre scene for people who aren't used to this. You have some people are laughing, some people are videotaping.
I just threw something on fire, Chris, a firecracker. Something's on fire! Shit.
Nick, you all right?
You okay? You okay? You okay, guys? You all right? Is everyone okay? You all right, William? Okay, we're okay. Our crew's okay. They just threw a firecracker in on us. What was that?
Yeah, that was more firecracker. Well, it's like one of those.
Was that like a
pretty powerful fire?
It might have been a flashbang, Nick.
How dare you?
How dare you?
Fire up a bowl and accept your fate.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see, most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them.
These people are sick.
You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society.
And yet these people have been programmed and, as you say, in place, and who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept. Mm-hmm. These are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the leagues of dissenters, dissidents. Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be the greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. for the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans.
These people are sick.
Thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boat crashes him, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression born from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized."
We choose science over fiction. We choose truth over facts.
This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise of earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not.
You know, someone very profoundly once said, many years ago, that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins. Never mind, he will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started.
Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in a state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking with every second. The disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation to the American people?
Well, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, of course, there must be a very strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of socialist, communist, whatever, welfare state, big brother government. If people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing ever can help the United States. You may kiss goodbye to your freedom, including freedoms to homosexuals, to prison inmate. All these freedoms will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives. The second thing, the moment at least part of the United States population is convinced that the danger is real, they have to force their government. And I'm not talking about sending letters, signing petitions, and all this beautiful, noble activity. I'm talking about forcing United States government to stop aiding communism. Because there is no other problem more burning and urgent than to stop the Soviet military-industrial complex from destroying whatever is left of the free world. And it is very easy to do. No credits, no technology, no money, no political or diplomatic recognition, and of course no such idiocy as grain deals to USSR. The Soviet people, 270 million of Soviets, will be eternally thankful to you if you stop aiding a bunch of murderers who sit now in Kremlin and whom President Reagan respectfully calls government. They do not govern anything, least of all such complexity as the Soviet economy. So basically, two very simple, maybe too simplistic answers or solutions, but nevertheless, they are the only solutions. Educate yourself, understand what's going on around you. You are not living at the time of peace. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself. You don't have much time, especially if you are talking about young generation. There's not much time left for convulsions to the beautiful disco music. Very soon it will go, just overnight. If we are talking about capitalists or wealthy businessmen, I think they are selling the rope on which they will hang very soon. If they don't stop, if they cannot curb their unsettled desire for profit, and if they keep on trading with the monster of the Soviet communism, they are going to hang very soon. And they will pray to be killed, but unfortunately they will be sent to Alaska probably to manage industry of slaves. It's simplistic. I know it sounds unpleasant. I know Americans don't like to listen to things which are unpleasant. But I have defected not to tell you the stories about such idiocies as microfilm, James Bond type espionage. This is garbage. You don't need any espionage anymore. I have come to talk about survival. It's a question of survival of this system. And you may ask me, what is it in for me? Survival, obviously, because as I said, I am now in your boat.
These people are sick.
In Washington, D.C., an elementary school principal in the affluent northwest section of the city recently wrote a letter announcing that, quote, We need more white parents to talk to their kids about race, especially now. The letter singled out, quote, white staff and white community members, whom the principal alleged had committed, quote, both macro and microaggressions against staff of color. The principal did not specify what those crimes were. She didn't need to. Their skin color was their crime. This is a national theme. It pains us to tell you that, but it's true. It's incredibly destructive and dangerous. Countless school districts are now using the 1619 Project from the New York Times, for example, as a curriculum. That project is the work of an out-of-the-closet racial extremist called Nicole Hannah-Jones. Jones, for example, recently argued it is not violence to loot and burn stores. It's justified. Her propaganda is now mandatory in public schools in Buffalo, Chicago, Newark, Washington. Many parents, understandably, deeply resent this. It's deranged. It's racist. But others don't. They are allies, and they've joined in. One mother in London, where the cult is also spreading, posted this photo on Twitter. It's of her daughter on bended knee, holding a sign declaring her privilege. The Cultural Revolution has come to the West. What will the effects of this be? This is just a moment. It will end. How will we feel about it looking back? Years from now, how will that little girl with the sign remember her childhood? Her mother took Tim Wise's advice. She no longer has innocence. Will she be grateful for that? It's hard to imagine she will be. More likely she will feel bitter and used because she has been used. And it's likely that many children growing up right now will feel the same way. Is there a single person who believes that this moment we're living through will end in racial harmony? That used to be what we wanted. Some of us still do want that. Is it even a goal anymore? It doesn't seem like it. Instead, it seems like many in power, it's very clear, in fact, that many in power are pushing hard for racial division, for hatred, for violence. And let's pray they don't get what they want. Tribal conflict will destroy a country faster than any plague. But keep in mind, as this insanity continues, that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every action provokes a reaction. That's physics. We don't know where this is going. We don't want to know where it's going. The cult members should stop now, immediately, before more innocents get hurt, and they will if they don't. Matt Walsh is the host of The Matt Walsh Show, and we're happy to have him on the show tonight. So, Matt, before I ask you where this is going, and I'm not even sure I want to know, what do you make of people sacrificing their own children on the altar of this new religion?
Well, it's obviously abusive, it's deranged. I mean, it's everything that you said it was. And I think it goes even deeper than that. We have to think about how deep this sickness is, that what they're telling their kids and what kids have been told in college for decades now. You think about critical race theory and all of that. They're told that white people are inherently racist. So it's part of your nature. There's nothing you can do about it. You're racist no matter what. Other races cannot be racist. You're the only one that can be, which means that all you can do is admit that you're racist, or you can deny it. If you admit it, then you're racist. If you deny it, well, that's exactly what a racist would do. And so really, it reminds me a lot of like the Crucible, the witch trials or something, where it's you're accused of being a witch. You can deny it, which is exactly what a witch would do, and that proves you're a witch. Or you can admit it, and then you're a witch. And that's kind of what it is with racism now, and that's what kids are being indoctrinated into, and they grow up to be self-hating, and I think that's by design.
I mean, here's the problem there's so many problems, but I think most Americans of all colors want to live in a country where your race is not the most important thing about you. In fact, it's mostly irrelevant, right? That was the goal that you and I grew up with, and I still support that. But if you attack people like this, you will, over time, get a reaction. And some of those reactions are going to be ugly. Why would someone want to do that? Why would you want to create a tribalized society, a violent society? What's the point of doing that? Seriously.
Well, I think that's right. We know the point, though. I think is control. It's about controlling people, but what's going to happen if you tell people to hate themselves and that they're inherently sick and that there's nothing they can do about it and they're racist and they're bigots, if you hammer that into their heads over and over and over again from a young age, I think it could go one of two ways. One is that you just submit to it, and then you have a lot of these so-called white allies of the Black Lives Matter protest literally bowing and kneeling before, you know, their masters in the Black Lives Matter movement. Or it could go the other way, and you're going to have people who go all the way to the other extreme and say, hey, you're calling me a bigot, I might as well just be one. And I think we're seeing that play out right now in society as we speak. And it's not going to get better. I think it's only going to get worse, unfortunately.
Okay, so this is all very obvious. This is a cul-de-sac. This doesn't end with a better society. It ends with something really awful. And that's very obvious. Like, there's nobody who doesn't know that. So where are the adults? Where are the Republican senators, for example? Where are the leaders standing up and saying, you know, no, you have to stop talking like this right now. You're wrecking the country. You're going to get people killed. Stop talking like this. Where are the people who should be saying that?
Well, I mean, they're cowering under their bed, I think. They're terrified. This is something I've noticed. You talk about Republicans and conservatives. I mean, even a lot of conservative commentators out there are now too afraid, it seems like, to criticize Black Lives Matter. And that's why when we've seen these riots over the past 2 weeks, one line that you hear from conservatives a lot is that, well, it's all Antifa doing this. And Antifa, they're the ones rioting and looting. And they are doing it. And Antifa, they are domestic terrorists. But clearly, look, Black Lives Matter has been a violent movement from its inception. Did we forget about Ferguson? Did we forget about Baltimore? Did we forget about Dallas? You know, 5 cops were executed in Dallas. That was before Antifa had risen to prominence. You can't blame that on Antifa. But what's happening is that there's this sanitization of Black Lives Matter and their ideology, their tenets, that's happening even on the right. And so if the right is buying into it, then I don't know where we go from there.
In a moment of crisis, cowardice is a sin. And there are a lot of cowards out there. I think we should remember their names and never give them authority again. And I hope you, Matt, will help remember their names, because I think, you know, it really matters to hold them accountable at some point. But thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
David Dorn is not a name on the lips of our leaders this week. It should be. Dorn served his community for almost 40 years as a police officer. Even after he retired, he continued to help others. Last weekend, Dorn was in St. Louis trying to protect a friend's store from looters, and he was murdered for doing it. This country ought to remember Dorn. He represents the best of America. Instead, his name has been shoved down the memory hole. The media would like him forgotten immediately so they can go back to inflaming hateful violence across our nation. We should not let that happen. He was not the only victim, by the way, of these riots, and not the only victim who has been forgotten. We think that's a shame. On Twitter, former White House speechwriter Darren Beattie, and good for him, has been keeping track of the casualties of this rioting, and we want to read some of them to you because it's important to remember people who've been killed. More than just one, many. David Patrick Underwood was a Federal Protective Service officer in California. A week ago, he was shot to death. We don't know who killed him. He was protecting a federal building in Oakland. One of his colleagues was also critically injured in that shooting. Natalia Marie Kelly was just 22 years old. She was attending a George Floyd-related protest in Davenport, Iowa. She became uncomfortable with the direction of that protest, understandably. She got in her car to leave, and she was killed by a stray bullet, shot dead. Jose Gutierrez was a bystander. He was watching as others looted the Chicago suburb of Cicero. For being there, he was shot in the head and killed by this man, Zion Haygood. That's what police say. Another victim in Cicero, Illinois was Victor Cesares Jr. He was 27. He was shot to death outside a grocery store. No one remembers his name. We should. In Minneapolis, Francisco Montiel, who was 46, was found dead next to a burned-out car. Police attributed his death to, quote, complex homicidal violence. That's obvious. He was a casualty of the riots. At least 3 people were murdered during the violence in Indianapolis. One of them was 38-year-old former Indiana football player Chris Beatty. He was found shot to death just outside his apartment. An unnamed Latino man in his 20s was also killed on Sunday in Los Angeles in an area that was completely demolished by rioters. And of course, those are just the ones who were killed. Probably not an exhaustive list. If you know more, please send them to us. Thousands have been hurt, maimed, financially ruined, brain damaged over the past week. Dozens of those are police officers. They were injured trying to protect the public. One of them is Las Vegas police officer Shay McLanis. He was shot during the riot on Monday. The man who shot him says it was an accident. He was just trying to scare away rioters. We don't know the truth, but the man took a bullet to the head, the police officer did. Every one of those people deserves to be remembered. But instead, again, they are forgotten, and they're forgotten on purpose. The press would like these protests to go down in history as mostly peaceful. They're not.
These people are sick.
Well, for months, as you well remember, the people in charge told you that they were unilaterally canceling your constitutional rights. You no longer had the right to assemble, to speak freely, to worship. You thought those were guaranteed by the Bill of Rights? Not anymore. In fact, in many parts of the country, people still don't have those rights. But our leaders said they had no choice but to take them away. This was a medical emergency. It was more important than your rights. They were lying. We always thought they were lying. Now we know for sure. Because today we have an open letter signed by more than 1,200 doctors, professionals, and public health officials. And it explains that the riots you're watching must be allowed, while any other demonstration, like one you might participate in, must be suppressed.
We choose science over fiction. We choose truth over facts.
Quote, as public health advocates, we do not condemn these gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. But they clarify this should not be confused with permissive stance on all gatherings, particularly protests against stay-at-home orders. Those actions not only oppose public health interventions, but they are also rooted in white nationalism and run contrary to respect for black lives. In other words, anybody who complains about being locked down is a racist, except the people who refuse to be locked down because they're protesting racism. Heads I win, tails you lose. These are public health officials. This is insanity. Just days ago, you were told that any kind of gathering could kill thousands of people. You'd be a murderer. You'd be a genocidal murderer. That was before we learned that viruses have their own woke political agenda. And so the only rallies we should ban are those being held by people who have the wrong ideas, people who want to earn a living or go to church. Those protests are racism.
We choose science over fiction. We choose truth over facts.
Oh, and this is all coming from people who lecture you about science. You wouldn't recognize science if they got in the shower with them, but they're still lecturing about science, which is always a pretext for ways to destroy our country and control your life. And by the way, to fleece you. Why are we paying for any of this crap, by the way? That's a question we're going to address in some detail next week. But right now, it's enough to know this is a sham. It was a front for tyrants to inflict their personal neuroses and their desire for control on the United States of America, and to do it outside the democratic process, outside democratic norms. Every person who signed this letter is a faker. None of them represent science. We should never listen to any of them again. Laura Logan, host Laura Logan, has no agenda on Fox Nation, which is fantastic. We're happy to have her join us now. So, Laura, you've been watching this from the very beginning. How is it, as a scientific matter, that viruses are not dangerous when they're transmitted at Black Lives Matter events, but they're very dangerous when transmitted at other events?
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by God. You know the thing.
Well, you know, for me, Tucker, as a journalist, the saddest thing about this letter is that it frames the entire pandemic in a very political context.
Exactly.
And I say that because I've been on the phone with a few doctors today, talking to them about this, and building on conversations with many different doctors and infectious disease specialists from the very beginning. And you only have to look at who the letter is actually written by, because you mentioned, you know, the healthcare professionals. It also has infectious disease specialists. But then it has community stakeholders, right, attached to it. And I went through the list. There are a lot of them who just have their names there. You have no idea who they are. So who or what is a community stakeholder in this context? And I do want to say that there are many examples in the history of this country where racism did play a role in the health care of black people in this country. There's no disputing that. No doctor that I spoke to dispute that in any way, right? And so that's really not the issue here for medical professionals. For the doctors who are on the front line of this virus, who are actually treating people, as opposed to those sitting, you know, where in the National Institutes of Health or in more academic positions, where they're looking at it from an academic or policy perspective versus being in the trenches. For those medical professionals, what they find so disturbing about this is that there are a number of medical concerns and related to COVID that are completely ignored by this, that put African Americans at greater risk, and they're not being addressed by the very health professionals who say they care about saving black people's lives.
How dare you?
Shame on you.
These people are sick.
So, for example, vitamin D deficiency, according to many doctors and according to multiple studies, there's one out of in Ireland, there's one in Indonesia, nobody disputes this, that vitamin D deficiencies is common in groups who are adversely affected by COVID-19. So, for example, military professionals, elderly people in nursing homes, and African American communities, who are historically deficient in vitamin D. And it affects your immune system, right? I won't go into the science because I'm not a doctor, but it's been explained to me, and no one also disputes that a strong immune system helps you. It impacts your ability, how sick you get with this virus, and also your survivability. So there are many things health professionals could be doing medically that are left out of a letter like this that can have a significant impact. If African Americans know that vitamin D deficiency makes them more vulnerable, and they're not putting out notices about that. It's not the only reason, right? But it is a factor.
Of course, because this has nothing to do with public health and never did. Laura Logan, great to see you tonight. Thank you for that. Before we go to break, what's the real casualty here? It's not simply public health. It's any remaining confidence that any of us had that the people issuing these proclamations from on high are telling the truth, who know what they're doing, are decent people. We know now, because it's very clear, that they're not. So nobody respects anybody in charge because they're not worth respecting. I want to put on the screen really quickly. This is a tweet from the top public health official in New York, Mark Levine. And here's his position. Let's be clear about something. If there is a spike in coronavirus cases in the next 2 weeks, don't blame the protesters, blame racism.
These people are sick. These people are sick.
These people are sick.
So, is that a public health pronouncement? No. It's a stupid little editorial comment driven by that moron's personal politics. But we're supposed to take that as an important directive from a government official. And no thinking person does. None. These people have devalued their own currency. No thinking person will ever listen to them again. And it's sad. So what would happen to our country if we eliminated law enforcement? Eric Garcetti is the mayor of Los Angeles, the second biggest city in America. His city would devolve into a murderous hellscape within hours if the police left. But Garcetti, who is in charge of the city, won't push back against this idea. Instead, he kneeled in subservience before the people demanding it.
LA Mayor Eric Garcetti joined protesters moments ago. What did he have to say?
Yes, he came out this morning, Jake, and he took the time to come out among the protesters. He knelt while he was out there saying and showing his solidarity for the movement, for the protesters here today. And I can tell you that today, this daytime protest has been very peaceful, very calm. Lots of chanting, singing.
He kneeled. Our leaders are kneeling before the mob. The atavistic ritual of self-abasement, of defeat, Suddenly, many are performing this ritual, including police around the country. The mob wants victory, but more than that, it wants the total humiliation of its enemies.
I work for Black Lives Matter. I'm sorry that I scared you. But since I work for that company, my CEO has told me to come out today and to bring you on your knees because you have white privilege. So if they see that a white person is getting on their knees, that shows solidarity for the situation. And could you just please apologize for, for your white privilege? Just apologize?
I am. I'm trying to think of the right words to say because that's a big thing to say.
It's big.
It comes from...
It's large in this country.
I'm incredibly sorry.
Why do we kneel? We kneel because we've lost. We kneel before our victors because they have won. We put down our resistance, we beg for their mercy. But mobs rarely forgive. We're on your side, we shout. We're in solidarity. Spare us. But they never do.
Why are you... We're on your side! We're on your side! Holy... We're on your side!
We're on your side as the rock comes through the window. You think the mob cares? No. What's happening to this country? Why are Americans surrendering to violent mobs? Well, because they've been told they have to. Everything we're now watching, the looting, the arson, the killing, has a purpose. The purpose, we're told again and again, is to end racist police violence against African Americans. We are told that that is the single greatest scourge in this country.
For the past 400 years stemming from slavery, there has been a genocide of black people in this country.
I'm sick and tired of seeing black men and women be killed and nothing be done about it.
We had a black man in the office, bro. They were still killing us, bro.
Stop killing us! Stop killing us! Stop killing us!
Stop killing us. It's chilling. And if you believe it and you're a decent person, you will be moved by it because it's awful. No American should ever be mistreated by those in authority, much less killed. The abuse of power is always and everywhere a sin, and it's increasingly common here. We should always work to end it. In this case, the death of a man at the hands of police in Minneapolis turned out to be a metaphor for abuse of power. That death has led to demands that we fire the nearly 700,000 police officers who work in the United States, and that we free the 1.5 million criminals who are now behind bars. Most decent people try really hard not to be bigoted. We're told not to be bigoted, and it's true. So to the best of your ability, you really do try and treat other people fairly and not consider them a member of a group, but as individuals created by God, each unique.
You know these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by God. You know the thing.
Most people try to do that, but in today's America, it's not enough. If you want to placate the woke mob, you have to humiliate and degrade yourself. At the beginning of the show, we showed you the woman who was ordered to her knees to apologize for her privilege, which of course she dutifully did. But outside Washington, D.C., in the affluent suburb of Bethesda, that individual sacrament has been replaced by a mass ritual. Watch this.
I will use my voice in the most uplifting way possible. And do everything in my power to educate my community.
So this is a religion, obviously. That's the liturgy. That's their Nicene Creed. What's it about? Is this religion about atonement and forgiveness and reconciliation? No, it's not. It's about dominance and submission, degradation, humiliation. Chairman Mao was onto this. The Cultural Revolution was filled with rituals like this. Watching from Twitter, an African-American woman summed it up this way. This is weird and uncomfortable, and I'm 99% certain most other people of color feel the same way. Y'all are getting weird, like Jonestown weird. Amen. Or as Cooper is co-chair of Project 21, author of the upcoming book, How Trump is Making Black America Great Again. Horace Cooper joins us tonight. Mr. Cooper, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
What is this, do you think?
This is an example of an evil that persists throughout all of recorded history. There has always been a group of people who want to claim they're better than other people. Today's woke mob needs to apologize to Bull Connor. You see, all they've done is just sort of substituted who is supposed to ingratiate themselves. But the concept is the same, an evil one. Our American system is an entirely different one, where all Americans are equal under the law.
Exactly. And if one day this group of rich people in Bethesda decides that one race is better than the other and one race has to apologize to the other race, they're perfectly capable of flipping that around, right? Watching this racism, it should make you nervous, right?
Absolutely, this is what history shows. My grandfather, Oscar Johnson, when he was a young man, he was forced to ingratiate himself. He was forced to do things to humiliate himself. But we know that it was wrong, not because he was black, but because he was a citizen of the United States. What our friends in the media, what those in academia, the so-called woke community need to understand is this principle of equality was hard fought. And when America formed and developed it and promoted it, it was something unique on the planet, something that it's not time in the 21st century to walk away from.
Well, I can add to that. And so I appreciate your saying it. Horace Cooper, thanks a lot for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Those are words to think about. This is a scary moment. We need to think clearly. A lot is at stake. So much is coming at you for a reason. They don't want you to think clearly, but shake it off and see America as it really is. That's our advice.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free and we will stay free. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly, but fires have been started.
But you can see, here, just around. Nobody's wearing them. Nobody's, there you go, including the camera. Yeah. Okay.
Striking images, Cal Perry. Cal, thank you very much.
Well, for months, as you well remember, the people in charge told you that they were unilaterally canceling your constitutional rights. You no longer had the right to assemble, to speak freely, to worship. You thought those were guaranteed by the Bill of Rights? Not anymore. And in fact, in many parts of the country, people still don't have those rights. But our leaders said they had no choice but to take them away. This was a medical emergency. It was more important than your rights. They were lying. We always thought they were lying. Now we know for sure. Because today we have an open letter signed by more than 1,200 doctors, professionals, and public health officials. And it explains that the riots you're watching must be allowed, while any other demonstration, like one you might participate in, must be suppressed. Quote, as public health advocates, we do not condemn these gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. But they clarify this should not be confused with permissive stance on all gatherings, particularly protests against stay-at-home orders. Those actions not only oppose public health interventions, but they are also rooted in white nationalism and run contrary to respect for black lives. In other words, anybody who complains about being locked down is racist, except the people who refuse to be locked down because they're protesting racism. Heads I win, tails you lose.
I'm going to tell you why I fly the American flag. During the Civil War, there was two types of flags that was flying. You had the American flag that represented the Northern Republican Party. You had the Southern flag, which was a Confederate flag that represented the Democratic Party. What's the difference between both? One for freedom and one not to stop slavery. Black Americans, I want you to educate yourself. The American flag is our symbol of freedom. Without that flag, we would have lost the war. The Democrats want you to hate something that gave you freedom. Don't fall for it. Thank you.
This concludes our broadcast day. Click.